the number of students coming from dairy farms within our classrooms is shrinking. And so having some of those students to rely on to share their experiences in the classroom is less than what it was 10 years ago. And so we're really trying to excite and get kind of non-traditional students excited about dairy. And so that's taking a little different approaches to getting them excited about dairy and finding those opportunities for them to gain some of that experience. But what we found when we get those students who are excited, they're ready to dive right in and, contribute to the dairy industry and be a part of it.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Dairy Podcast Show. I'm your host for today, Gail Carpenter. I'm the State Dairy Extension Specialist at Iowa State University, and I'm joined today by actually one of my colleagues. I won't say one of my favorite colleagues because you're not supposed to have favorites, right? But I do enjoy getting to work with Christen Burgett, who's our guest today. Christen got both her bachelor's and her master's degree from North Dakota State University. She finished her master's in 2012, began as a lecturer at Iowa State University in August of 2012, and is now an associate teaching professor in the department. She coaches our dairy judging team, advises our dairy science club, very active on the curriculum committee, and is a great contributor to our department. So excited to talk to Christen today.
Wow. Well, thanks for having me, Dr. Gail. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm an avid podcast listener, so to be on the other side is very exciting.
Yeah, well, we're excited to chat. So how did you end up in going from North Dakota to Iowa? I would say it's a little bit warmer down here, but as we're recording this today on January 19th, it might not feel like it's that much warmer in Iowa than North Dakota. But what brought you down here? What was the draw?
Well, I would have to say, so like you said, being from North Dakota, dairies are not as plentiful as in other states. But I got into showing dairy cattle with a friend as when we were younger. And so I visited her family dairy farm, and then we got into showing throughout the summers. And so I kind of got introduced to dairying that way. And then when I went to North Dakota State University, it took me a while to see the light to switch my major to animal science. And then once I did, I really found my niche there and did dairy judging and worked at our university dairy farm. And so then after I got my master's, I was looking for jobs. And to be quite honest, I thought I would have to teach at a community college. And so I saw this lecturer position open at Iowa State, and I called the department chair and I thought, is this a legit thing? And they were like, yep, absolutely. So I put in my materials, and lo and behold, that's how I ended up here. And I really liked the atmosphere of Iowa State. It was obviously we're in the Midwest, so it made me feel like I was at home. And yes, some winters usually are warmer than back home. So I'm hoping maybe by the time I retire, I can be in Arizona or Florida where it's nice and warm. But the draw too is a dairy state. And so it's a really great opportunity for me to further develop my dairy skills and knowledge in a state that is very productive in dairy, and to kind of continue teaching others about the dairy industry and dairy judging.
Evonik Animal Nutrition is committed to ensure food security and safety while reducing the ecological footprint of animal farming. Its products and services use evidence-based solutions that seek to promote animal welfare and reduce reliance on natural resources. All this is underpinned by long-standing industry partnerships and deep customer understanding. Evonik's focus on efficiency, sustainable, healthy nutrition, and collaborations with livestock farming partners creates value for customers and consumers.
Well, very good. And I know that's something that you're very passionate about is teaching the future members of the dairy industry and getting to work with students. Have students changed in the time that you've been teaching? So I know since I've graduated, there's some differences that I see now in my college experience versus the students that I work with today. So have you seen over the course of your career that students are evolving or changing or have different expectations?
Yes, absolutely. And yes, dare I say, I've been here for a decade. It sounds old when you say it like that. But
Wow.
yes, from when I first started, as with, I'm sure many people, they have realized that the number of students coming from dairy farms within our classrooms is shrinking. And so having some of those students to rely on to share their experiences in the classroom is less than what it was 10 years ago. And so we're really trying to excite and get kind of non-traditional students excited about dairy. And so that's taking a little different approaches to getting them excited about dairy and finding those opportunities for them to gain some of that experience. But what we found when we get those students who are excited, they're ready to dive right in and, contribute to the dairy industry and be a part of it. And so, I would say that would be one of the biggest things is less students coming from dairies. And then the other thing is some of the students, their experiences in life too are kind of changing some of their behaviors as to how they're acting as students from what we used to see. And a large part of that, right, we have to say is COVID. So some of their communication skills are maybe not where they were 10 years ago because they were on, social media and Zoom all the time. And so sometimes being in a group with other people, they may not be as well spoken as they have been in the past. And some of that too, other things that have changed over time is their willingness to accept constructive feedback. I have seen wane over time, especially in terms of when they get internships, how to better themselves and develop some of those soft skills that we really push and try to enhance through our programs. And so, those have been some of the big things that come to mind when thinking about how the student demographics have changed over the years.
Yeah, you mentioned internships. And I think that's one thing that I've noticed at least is, when I was an undergrad, I did an internship, but most of my summers, I just had a job, right? And I worked on campus. I loved it. I probably could have called it an internship, but I didn't really call it an internship. And I think most of my friends it's been a while for me too, but most of my friends, you'd maybe do one or two internships, but it wasn't as big of a deal, it seems like, as it is now. And maybe it's just an Iowa State thing. I don't know, but it seems like our students get snatched up really quick for those internships. And we're at a stage right now where a lot of students have known for months what they're going to be doing this summer, and they have their internships lined up and everything. And they're really able to get a lot of those experiences. Has that been your experience as well?
Absolutely. I would echo that. I think back to my days as an undergrad, and our career fair at NDSU was somewhat small in terms of the animal companies that were there. But even then, internships, occasionally you'd see maybe 10 posted on a bulletin board in the department, and that was it. And if you didn't take time to read about them, you knew I didn't know anything. So maybe I wasn't a good student and that I didn't know as much as maybe I should have. But I would really applaud our department in that we do promote internships and talk about their importance. And I mean, we're talking and promoting them in student visits. So students even have these on their radar when they're in high school and thinking about that. And maybe too, companies over the past decade have really embraced internships too, and they see the value in them. And they're trying to develop a company culture to create these opportunities for students as a good screening opportunity for them to maybe look into some potential talent that they're going to have in the future. So I think our students do a good job too now of, strategically planning when I want this and this internship. And yet I think we do a good job providing them resources to enhance their cover letter and resume to give them that, best foot forward when they're at career fair in October. So.
Yeah, I wonder the same thing a lot of times. Like I did one internship one summer, and I always think, was I a bad student or was it just like, so I'm glad to hear, because I'm sure you were a great student. So I'm glad to hear you have the same experience that I did. Because it is something that, our students are doing it even after their freshman year. A lot of times, a lot of them will do 3 internships and then they have a job their first summer out just from some of the experiences that they had and some of the things that they've done. And you coordinate a lot of those internships, right? You kind of do some of the grading of their, or I don't know if it's grading, but you do the internship assessment for course credit, right?
Correct.
And I know as a fellow advisor of Dairy Science Club that you also will, and I do the same thing. We forward out internships to our students. You send them, I'm sure, to your advisees and help them find something that's a good fit for them. So if we have companies or company representatives listening to this podcast, what would you tell them about what makes an internship a good experience for the students that are for the student and for the company?
Certainly, yeah, I get that question a fair bit. And so I think for companies, what makes an internship a really great experience for the student coming on board is that you really expose the students to maybe all facets of your organization or company. And I mean, yes, there are going to be tasks that they need to complete maybe repetitively on a daily basis, but then taking some time to go above and beyond that. I'm going to use our swine counterparts as an example. They do a good job of having students do 2 weeks in farrowing, 2 weeks in breeding, 2 weeks in finishing, and then they kind of have some flexibility. Say a student's interested in nutrition, then they might follow the nutritionist around for a couple days and go on some sales rides with them. Or if they have meetings over the nutrition plan, the students can sit in on those meetings to see how that's kind of coordinated and conducted. And so I think then too, companies should really think about, what employees in your company would make a good mentor and who wants to mentor interns, right? Maybe mentoring an intern isn't for everybody, but find those ones who want that. And that too can help them kind of maybe jazz up and spice up their daily routine as having an intern that they can oversee and mentor. And the other things that make some internships really great that students come back with for feedback is that they usually get assigned a project to do throughout the internship that they can have ownership of. And then they're presenting that at the end of the summer to company leadership and giving maybe some of their suggestions and ways for them to improve certain things. And so it's kind of it's got to be well thought out and hopefully executed and implemented, but still can be tailored from year to year. But those are kind of the big components, I think. Broad experiences across the company, but then finding ways to tailor it for each individual intern that you may have.
Yeah, I think in some ways, we hold our students to a higher standard for what they should accomplish in college. And it seems like companies are also kind of being held to a higher standard as well for what they offer for these internships, because I'm sure you've heard the students talk to each other about like, oh, this is a good one. You want to try for this one. And I didn't have as good of an experience with this one. So I think, the onus can be on the companies sometimes to make sure that they're putting their best foot forward, because it is a recruiting tool, right?
Absolutely. And I think that comes down to their kind of internship description form and how they're promoting it, making sure that the interns are doing what you said they are going to do, because nothing frustrates those students more than getting, on paper they were going to do this. But then once they start the internship, maybe some company dynamics happen that you have a void and they end up doing something totally different than what they got promised. And so that makes them a little frustrated. So then I think thinking of ways to clearly define what they're going to be doing, adhering to that, and then creating some checkpoints throughout the summer of, meeting with the intern, assessing how they're doing, providing suggestions for how they can get better. And I think that frequent feedback will be better doing it more often than just, wait till the end of the internship and find out how they were doing when maybe they've been stewing over something for weeks that maybe
Right.
could have been addressed early on to make it a more enriching experience for both parties. So
Yeah. I'd say also a lot of students don't necessarily want to do like the menial work, right? And of course, menial work is a big part of the experience of getting experience, right? You kind of have to start at the bottom and work the way up. But I can say that a lot of our students are very capable of handling some higher level decision making, independent thinking type of roles. And, depending on the student and depending on the company, there's really a great opportunity for a lot of these students to let them like go out on their own and try new things and let them think critically and grow and add value to your company that way.
yes, and I mean, if companies are maybe hesitant to have students just hit the ground running right away, maybe that's for you. They should just plan a 1 to 2 week. That's kind of our training, and have your checklist of what you want these students to be shown how to do it. They prove their proficiency, and then you can move on. And yes, absolutely have them go on and do more things with less oversight. But again, I think having all of those checkpoints and things documented as to how you're going to progress through that are pretty important. And I think just having that well laid out and good feedback can keep everyone online and happy with how things are going.
Yeah, there's a middle ground, I guess, between holding their hand, right, and wanting to look over their shoulder and double check everything, but they are still learning and they're getting the internship experience as a mentoring experience, like you said. And so finding those people that are those good fits that are there because they have like those skills in developing people and mentoring people is what I hear from our students coming back anyway, is what really makes it makes it a good experience. And they keep those connections forever.
Mhm.
A lot of the people that they meet, whether it's their fellow interns, the people in your company, the farmers that they're working with, they keep those connections.
And I think the other thing too, lastly, that can really help, set the stage for a good internship is having a really great onboarding program and getting them everything that they need up front and, going through how to file an expense report and hear who's kind of the key leaders in the company and maybe having those people present, but then saying, okay, here are your other colleagues that you're going to be working with on a daily basis. And if these companies have more than one intern, maybe doing a couple intern gatherings throughout the summer so they can network and communicate with maybe future colleagues, but they want to get to know other interns and maybe go do a fun little golf outing or go to a baseball game. So it's not
Hmm.
totally just business, but sprinkle in a little playtime in there too, I think can really resonate. And maybe some students have never been to a Major League Baseball game and they're going to be so excited. So some of
Yeah.
that small stuff too can go a long way in providing them with a little swag. If they're going to be maybe on your sales team, provide them with a company logo so they can look professional because our college students are scraping by with for money. So I think the more we can do to help set them up for success, the better they'll be too.
Yeah. And I'll say in our field, animal science, that yeah, you mentioned money. I know in some fields, unpaid internships are a norm. But I would not say, in our experience, at least, that's not the norm for our students. And to have a competitive internship, it's usually going to have to be a paid experience for our kids.
Correct, absolutely. And I think for the most part, that's what they're looking for. And so, actually, Mr. Mike Gall, the director of our CALS Career Services Office, he's got a really great internship summary document that tells what is the average pay that summer interns are are earning, and then it breaks it out by their age in school. So I mean, I tell some interns to go look at that document to see where your range should be for how much you're earning, but that could be a great resource too for companies to see what students are making. And some days I think I should go pick up a summer internship because some of these companies are paying interns very, very well, and it's
Hmm.
more than the $10 I used to get when I
I
was a
know, right?
student. So times have changed.
I know $10 was a lot back then, though.
Oh yeah, we were making dough.
I think I was making 9. So one of the things you mentioned about how students have changed in the time that you've been in your position, is that a lot more students are coming not from farm backgrounds. And I think that's going to be the reality of our industry for a long time, right? I say this a lot, but we have fewer and fewer dairy farms and more jobs in agriculture and more students coming to study agriculture. So just by simple math there, we're going to have a shortage of students who grew up on a dairy and have that dairy experience. And the other thing too is just because a student, their parents' dairy or they come from a dairy doesn't necessarily mean that they have the same dairy experiences as their other peers who come from a dairy farm, right? So if you come from a large dairy and you have hired labor that handles your milking, or if you milk with robots, like you may never have milked a cow, even though you grew up on a farm. So even our students that come from dairy farms, their experiences can vary quite a bit in terms of what we might have expected 10 years ago or so. But can you talk a little bit about what you're doing to get those students who don't come from a farm background excited about jobs in the dairy industry and possibilities in the dairy industry?
Sure, yeah. So one of those is so I teach our Intro to Dairy Cattle Science class. And so that's for typically sophomores. I get a lot of juniors in there too. And so it's an introductory course for any and all things related to dairy. So we cover a lot. Students say, wow, you cover a lot of information in this class. But I was like, the dairy industry is so diverse. We have to talk about a lot of things. And so what I try to do in this introductory class is it's a 50-minute lecture twice a week, but then we have a lab session for 2 hours on Wednesday. And I've got 4 different lab sections. And so for typically 7 to 8 of those labs, students are out at our university dairy research and teaching unit. And so a lot of those might be, the first one is doing a walking tour of the dairy farm. And then the second week, we might expose them to some of the younger calves and heifers. And then we go into the lactating cow barn. So that way they can go walk around lactating cows and observe their behavior and kind of compare and contrast how they differ in terms of flight zone and point of balance. And so trying to do some of those activities in the class is kind of their first exposure to dairy. It's usually kind of fun to watch them try to pet the calves and hesitantly walk walk around the cows. I'm like, they're just nice, gentle giants, so it's okay. But then once they show an interest like that, sometimes they'll inquire about working out at the university dairy farm. So I'll get them in contact with our farm manager personnel to see what opportunities are maybe out there for them to go and work. Some of them, though, might take an interest in pursuing research. So then I'll recommend Dr. Gale and some of our other dairy research colleagues to have them go reach out to them and see what they can do if they have opportunities available in their lab. And then if they're, don't have a lot of hands-on experience, then I'll maybe talk to them and say, well, maybe you should first look at a production internship. So either trying to line up a little mini winter internship for 4 to 5 weeks over our winter break, since it's a little longer, or else then, yes, that first summer, maybe working on a dairy farm near them so they can get those basic hands-on skills. And then that next summer, they can go ahead and look for maybe more of the applied internships that are focused on nutrition or breeding and genetics and mating. And then from there, if they're really interested in dairy, then they can keep going on in our dairy curriculum. So then they'll take our one of our 400 level dairy classes taught by Dr. James Coltis, and then they'll go on to hopefully Dr. Gale's dairy farm analysis class.
Hopefully, yeah.
Otherwise, too, sometimes I try to rope them into doing dairy judging if they have any interest in kind of learning a little bit more about how to physically evaluate dairy cattle. Otherwise, if they're more on kind of, farm analysis and troubleshooting and want to go into that consulting role, I'll direct them to Dr. Gale for Dairy Challenge. And then, too, simply joining the Dairy Science Club, because we do a lot of, a fall and a spring industry tour trip. And for some of those students, then they get to go on a couple dairy farms or go to a processing facility, and it's all totally new for them, and they like that. And so just trying to field as many opportunities their way and just encourage them to get involved. Sometimes I think students think the opportunities are going to come to them, which is not the case, right? They're there for them, but they need to put their boots on and go after those opportunities. And then sometimes it's like, hey, one event you're in, people will welcome you with open arms, and then the rest is history. So
yeah. So I'll kind of pull our two conversation threads together then. So say an intern, a company is looking to hire a student for an internship, and the student maybe doesn't come with a dairy farm background, is trying to gain some of that new experience. What would you recommend to a company who's trying to train a student like that? What would you say they should be able to expect from a student who, they're starting through this college experience to get involved with the dairy industry, but they maybe didn't start until they were 18 or 19 years old?
So if I were that company, then I would look to see, yes, does that student maybe have some of that production internship experience? And if you're really interested in the student, maybe encourage them, if they haven't already, to, yes, work out at the university dairy farm, do that little mini winter internship to get some of that production experience. Or if your company has the ability or has some partner farms that you do research with, maybe the first 2 weeks of the internship is having them be on those farms to hopefully maybe develop some of those skills. But then I would just think it's having the conversation with the student. Okay, yes, where did your passion and interest for dairy start? Why are you so excited and enthusiastic about joining our industry, and what can you bring to the table? And then I would maybe just look too to see what their other involvement is. Are they active? Are they involved? Do they have the soft skills that they can bring to the table? Because a lot of times those are hard for us to really teach and hone in the classroom. But then I really think a lot of the times we can teach them the knowledge-based content that we want them to learn as part of the job. But then maybe somewhere, like I said, at some of those satellite farms maybe that you have, try to get them that hands-on experience if that's the one thing they're lacking. But I think they can overcome and compensate for that through their enthusiasm and willingness to learn.
I'm glad you brought up soft skills. I think your answer to this question is going to be similar to some of what you already said. But I think that's something we hear a lot from our stakeholders, right? That those soft skills are something that they really value in graduates. Maybe even sometimes more so than the hard skills or the technical skills. They really want graduates who can go connect with people, build relationships, and make some of those connections. But like you said, they're very hard to teach in class. So I think we spend a lot of time talking about This is something that our stakeholders have said they want. How can we provide that for them, right? Like, how can we actually make sure that our students are developing some of those soft skills? Because it's not like you can give a lecture about how to cold call. Well, like you could do a lecture about how to cold call a farmer, but maybe not give so much a lecture about like here's how to be a good human. Here's how to have a good conversation with somebody. Here's how to build a relationship. It's not something you can like give a lecture and test on and expect them to just all of a sudden have acquired these soft skills, right? So what are you doing in class or outside of class with extracurriculars? How do you help students kind of develop some of those?
Kind of the first one I tried to do this fall on a large scale with 108 students in my class was I had them actually do a dairy podcast summary presentation. So they had to find a dairy related podcast, summarize it down to a 5-minute presentation, and deliver that in front of their peers. And so, that was good for them to, synthesize, summarize, and present. Unfortunately, they didn't quite get as much of the immediate feedback after the presentation about here's what we could have improved on. Yeah, they got it on the paper evaluation, but on a large scale like that wasn't quite attainable. But that's where I think then once these students, if they're involved in, say, the Dairy Science Club, we really encourage them to be a part of a committee, pursue a leadership role, and maybe work towards being on the executive team. Because I think in those roles, that's really where they can start to develop those skills that may need more honing. And two, some of these students may simply not know what it all entails to maybe chair a committee. And so I think just starting for them to feel comfortable with being uncomfortable is a good starting point for them, because it's through those roles that they'll get more direct feedback from the executive team and maybe the older students within their club. But then maybe once they reach that higher tier of the executive team, that's kind of where myself and Dr. Gale, we kind of come into play since we co-advise the club. But then we have a little closer connection with those students and can provide them more direct feedback. And so maybe kind of reaching those upper roles is where they'll get more direct one-on-one feedback from us and develop those relationships to get that constructive feedback.
Oh, see, I thought you were going to say the judging team.
Well, I was just going to segue into that too. But yeah, so through dairy judging, I like that because like Dairy Challenge, dairy judging is very one-on-one. And so when students come to you for their oral set of reasons, we can really provide them specific feedback on here's what you did well, here's what we need to improve on. Hopefully, not all the time, they are writing down our feedback and can implement that in their next set. But I think that's really where the growth and development comes, is from that one-on-one direct feedback. And then, yes, when you're out looking at that class of 4 animals, explaining your thoughts and rationale and having, calling on them to share their thoughts and comments too, and maybe correcting maybe how they're misreading some part of the cow or whatnot. But yeah, it's the one-on-one feedback I think is so critical. But yes, to do it to the masses of 100 students, that is a challenge. But I think then that's where it's up to every individual student to go seek out those opportunities to get the one-on-ones. And you and me, we will willingly meet with students in our office or wherever it may be, but they've got to meet us 50-50.
Yeah, I know that it surprises people a lot of times when I tell them this, but I was actually a super shy high schooler and a super shy kid in general. And one of the main things, I'm, of course, coach of the Dairy Challenge team. You, of course, coach the Dairy Judging team. And I feel like in industry, there's kind of this, unless you're in genetics, right? If you're in a genetic role, then a lot of times it's easier to see the value of dairy judging. But I feel like even a lot of like our nutritionists or people who are maybe a little bit more separated from the genetics or the phenotype side, you talk about judging teams and they just kind of, it's a judging team. It seems like kind of a old fashioned almost compared to Dairy Challenge. And although I am the Dairy Challenge coach, I do not like that at all. And I can say from personal experience, I was on a dairy judging team in 4-H in college, and I coached different teams through grad school. I helped you out when you were on maternity leave a couple years ago. I am so committed to the idea of dairy judging and the value that it can add to students for their soft skills and their confidence. And I don't know how many times I've tried to, when you get students come in who present or they write and they have had like a good solid training in dairy judging or livestock judging or whatever judging team it is, you can tell in their communication, at least That's what I think. A lot of times they do a better job organizing their thoughts. They're confident. They present themselves well. And I can really, and I know a lot of times will, like, my reaction sometimes, my knee-jerk reaction when I'm coaching our dairy challenge team sometimes is almost to be like, what would you do if this was a set of reasons? Like, my mind always goes back to like giving oral reasons and how we would organize thoughts and oral reasons. And I try to use that as an example a lot of organizing your thoughts. And so, yeah, not to go off on a soapbox, but I think that, judging teams sometimes get the short end of the stick because people think that's for show kids or people who like purebred cattle or whatever, people who want to go into a genetics field. But I personally think every student would benefit from being on a judging team.
Certainly, right? And I mean, it's not just, learning how to physically analyze a cow, but I think a lot of times for our vet students, that could be very valuable for them to know and how to communicate their way around a cow and to know anatomy would be wonderful. And even for those kids who are just going back home to the family farm, how to maybe detect lameness more quickly than just thinking, hey, she's just walking normally when nope, there are some major issues there. But like you said, in addition to the classic communication skills, these students too, in addition to, like you already said, yes, organizing their notes in shorthand, that is such a lost skill these days because students don't take notes or they type it all on their computer. And yes, when you ask them to organize their notebook, some of them are a hot mess. And I'm like, no wonder you were so confused trying to give in your set of oral reasons because this is not organized. But yes, having that logical thought process, being persuasive, and yes, then being polished and confident in the reasons room. But two, I think is just providing students a platform to be competitive with other students who are passionate about dairy, giving them opportunities to go see dairy farms around your state or even, around the country is great for them. And then two, they're having to commit to something and show their dedication, which is somewhat hard for this generation of students to do, is to commit to something for more than a month or 2 months, right? Being on a dairy judging team can be a year to a 2-year long commitment, depending on how your program is set up. But it's when we're practicing on Saturdays here, we are gone from, anywhere from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. So that's a long day. They're giving up their Saturday and a Cyclone football game to go dairy judging. But I think the trade-off of what they are developing kind of oversees that. And so, they don't have to be the kid who comes from a dairy farm to dairy judge, because I've had great students in the past who, are quick learners and they can pick up things and they can get their name called at a contest. And so for them to do that, they're just so excited. And I think that's part of it too, is being able to teach these students and have them embrace what you're telling them and get excited about it. And then being able to deliver at a contest is part of the fun as well.
Yeah, that's what I always tell students too. In my experience, there's not a clear correlation between growing up around cows or even growing up around show cows and doing well as a dairy judge. I've seen kids who grew up showing and grew up around the purebred industry that don't succeed. And I've seen kids who have never seen a cow before until they walked in on the first day of dairy judging, who pick it up and they learn and they do really well. And so, yeah, I think that's one of those, judging seems to be one of those skills that doesn't really discriminate based on how much experience you've had.
Exactly. And I think as long as and the thing with judging too, and the reason side of things is it's like these students need to persist and they need to apply themselves, because the incremental changes they make, it takes time, it's not just going to happen overnight. But I think then they see themselves progressing and committing and getting better, that too further continues their drive and enthusiasm for dairy judging. But yeah. And two, the thing that's tough with judging these days, and I'll admit why we're struggling, I think, to get student numbers, is there's so many things for students to get involved in that it's hard for them to maybe kind of triage what is most important to them, or some of these other quick commitments are superseding their decision to commit to something as big as dairy judging. But then for those kids who make the commitment and they see the value in the history of the program, I think then they get really proud of being a member of the dairy judging team and having done it when it's all said and done.
Yeah. That brings up a great point too. We talk about advice that we'd give to employers, but one of the things that I hear students do a lot is try and get those quick experiences, right? And they're trying to fill that resume. And that's the whole thing. I want to fill my resume. I want to do this for my resume. And on the one hand, yes, we want you to get a lot of experiences, but it's really easy to include a line on your resume and make it look really good, but not have actually gotten a whole lot out of it, right? So I would encourage companies, as you're reviewing some of these resumes, not to look as much at the quantity of the experiences, but the quality of the experiences and the value of the experiences. Because it's one thing to say, oh yeah, I helped out on a research project, and maybe you did it for a couple weeks and you weren't super involved, versus a student who's, maybe been working their max hours out at the university dairy for all 4 years and has really gotten involved in more of the management side and the herds person side a little bit more. Just as an example, but it's really easy for students in college right now to just get to fill their resume with a bunch of fluff, right? And not to say that those aren't good experiences, but checking to make sure that they do have those quality experiences as well, whether that's dairy science club involvement, dairy judging involvement, dairy challenge, whatever it happens to be.
Absolutely. Like you said, I'd rather see a student with 2 to 3 meaningful club involvements, and maybe they took on a leadership role within one of those clubs, versus someone, yes. And we've seen them, right? They've got 7 clubs listed on there. Sure, they list an active member, but what are you really contributing to the team and taking away from that experience? No different than probably in the workforce place or workplace too, right? I'm sure companies have maybe a couple committees here and there, but it's like I'd rather have people involved in a couple committees putting forth a lot of time and effort than having people spread
Mm-hmm.
really thin and just showing up and being a warm body. So
Our Yeast 40 is a natural biotechnology from ICC designed to boost the health and productivity of animals under challenging production systems. Our Yeast 40 performance is supported by an unique processing technology that results in a pure product containing high levels of beta-glucans, MOS, and yeast metabolites. These factors, combined, promote the ruminal and intestinal modulation, helping the animals to reach their full potential.
Speaking of extracurricular activities, you were recently appointed to the National Dairy Shrine Board of Directors. So congratulations on that, first of all. Can you tell us what the National Dairy Shrine does?
yes, thank you. Yeah, I was really flattered to get the invitation to join. And so, yes, we are a 24-person board member of Dairy Shrine. And so Dairy Shrine, their mission statement is really, helping to continue and enhance the vibrancy of the dairy industry and bringing together all segments of the industry, whether you're a producer, you're in academia, science, industry, a processor, you name it, trying to bring everybody together to really rally around kind of the 3 pillars that make up the Dairy Shrine. And so the first one is being kind of youth recognition. And so we recognize our youth who are active in dairy through our very robust scholarship program. Every spring now, we award over $40,000 worth of scholarship money to students. And some of these scholarships are, anywhere from $1,000 to $2,500. So these are good, substantial scholarships. We're working on developing a mentorship program. And then at World Dairy Expo, they hold a luncheon for college age students. And so a lot of times our dairy judging team members attend the luncheon, and they'll have a professional speaker to talk about kind of career readiness and things like that. And so kind of investing and developing our youth. They're also into promoting and recognizing industry leaders. And so for your listeners, I'm sure they've heard a lot about the guest of honor at World Dairy Expo. And so they have a couple other awards that they give out at their Dairy Shrine banquet, from the awards such as the Distinguished Dairy Cattle Breeder Award and the Pioneer Award. And so those are, pretty hefty awards and, revered by the industry and those who get those. And so we promote the industry that way and our leaders. And then the last pillar is just preserving and kind of telling dairy's history story. And so they do that through a very well curated museum that's located in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. And they have it kind of housed, and they work in collaboration with the Fort Atkinson Historical Society. But if you're ever in Madison or near Madison and have time to go to Fort Atkinson, check out the museum. It's really great looking at some of their fun artifacts that they have, and really how our United States dairy industry has evolved over the years. And it's really quite interesting to see from where we've been to where we are today, to really think about how we are as progressed as we are and advanced, and how we are contributing so much to the global dairy industry. It's really quite the story to tell and share.
Yeah, it is a really cool place to visit if you ever have a chance to go. And the Hordes Dairyman Farm is also in Fort Atkinson, which is also a cool place to visit and check off your bucket list. So,
And then the other thing, the museum's attached to the Hordes Museum as well, and kind of the old Hordes house. So that's really cool. And then I guess another thing that we do to promote youth is we try to sponsor, or anyone can really sponsor, these lifetime memberships for anybody really within the dairy industry. But what we do at Iowa State for our Dairy Science Club, we have a banquet every spring for our graduating seniors. For those who are interested in receiving a sponsored lifetime membership, I'll go out and try to seek out some very generous donors to sponsor those students for a $50 lifetime membership. And then we hand out their membership form and lapel at the Dairy Science Banquet. And then they're a lifetime member of the Dairy Shrine. And so I think that's a great way to get students and people involved in the Dairy Shrine. So I was thinking the other day too, it would be interesting if companies, maybe after some of their new employees had been there for maybe a year or 2 years, or maybe up to 5 years max, maybe as
yeah.
kind of their like yearly, hey, you've been with us for a year, maybe provide them with a lifetime membership to the Dairy Shrine or things like that, because then they'll get access to our quarterly newsletter and kind of just be kept in the loop on upcoming events and award winners and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah. So if people want to learn more about Dairy Shrine and your mission and what you're up to, where can they go?
So they can check us out at www.dairyshrine.org.
All right, very good. We've been talking, it doesn't even feel like it. We've been talking for a while now. Any last thoughts, any last words of wisdom before we ask you the top 3 questions that we ask all of our guests?
Oh, not that I can think of offhand.
It's time for our famous 3. Typical fresh cow incidence of clinical hypocalcemia is 3 to 6%, while subclinical hypocalcemia affects 50% or more mature cows. Based on cutting-edge research, Exelite offers a new approach that is build effective and the ZDUs. For more information, visit www.protecta.com.
All right. Well, our first question that we ask all of our guests is, what is your favorite dairy-related book or resource?
Ooh, that's a good one. I have to say I am partial to Hordes Dairyman magazine, due in part because I use some of their articles a lot of times for a class when I'm updating and more of the statistics, like the dairy processors and dairy trends over the years. But sometimes when I do my reading assignments for students, I like the articles in Hordes. They're a quick, easy read that they can understand and grasp, and they're relevant and practical. And then I use the dairy cow judging contest for the dairy judging class in the spring. So Hordes Dairyman is kind of my go-to. And I like their podcasts and webinars and everything else that they've got going on.
Yeah, they put out a lot of really good quality content.
Yes.
So what is your favorite non-dairy related book or resource?
My favorite book, I will admit, it is a book called Years by LaViral Spencer. She wrote this book back in 1986. She's from Minnesota. It takes place in North Dakota, so that's maybe why I like it. But it's a pioneer romance novel about a teacher who comes of age, and she moves from Fargo to Northwest North Dakota and thinks she's going to be moving to a thriving big city. And nope, it's a very small town in North Dakota, and she falls in love with a wheat farmer. So
I don't think I've heard of that one. I'm going to have to check it out.
it'll be a bestseller by tomorrow.
There we go. All right. And so our last question that we ask all of our guests is, what sets successful dairy professionals apart from those who are not successful?
Ooh, this is a loaded question. I don't think there's one particular trait, but I would say that what comes to mind first and foremost is their passion and enthusiasm for what they do. And then coupled that with Ooh, grit. We've both read that book by Angela Duckworth. Is having just some
Hmm.
grit and perseverance to kind of get through the daily, well, how would you say, the daily grind of your tasks, like tackling your email and all of that stuff. I can't remember where I heard it or read it once, but we spend about 80% of our day, yes, doing those mundane tasks, and only 20% doing the big projects that we really want to get after. I'd almost argue that's almost 90-10 these days.
Hmm.
But getting through those things to really get after the big picture things of what you're out to set to achieve, and having good communication skills, verbal and written. And then, working well with the team and being
Yeah.
collaborative, and then, sprinkle in a little bit of a servant attitude and serving others and wanting to build and boost team morale, and, looking out for the greater good of the group rather than just your own agenda. So
Sounds like a great cocktail.
I know. I'd be eager to see how that tastes.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining us today, Christen, and thanks for everybody for joining us on the Dairy Podcast Show.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.